This is a game between a master and a C player. And we'll see in this game how a miscalculation led to the loss by the lower rated player. The master is playing white here, and he opens with pawn to d4, one of the standard first pawn moves to the center. And black copies with his own pawn move. That's acceptable. And now pawn to c4, attacking the pawn right away. And there are many, many options now. Black could allow the capture, he could recapture, he could defend, he could develop. All acceptable moves. And he defends, opens up the diagonal for the bishop. And now we have the potential check here. And the knight develops, defending the e pawn, the e square, attacking the d square, stopping the immediate check, although now the bishop could come and pin. The knight develops in preparation for castling, and also now is hitting the center squares in preparation for battle in the center. And now the bishop comes out, and we have our first pin. The knight is pinned now to the queen. And the knight defends. Comes out, the queen knight defends. An option. Now the pawn advances and defends this pawn. Should black take this white pawn, now the bishop could recapture, and it also opens up the diagonal for the bishop in preparation for castling. And now the bishop blocks the pin, and now black is free to castle. Good advice. Whenever you're pinned, you should either block the pin or get out of the pin one way or another before the pressure starts to build. And now the knight develops, defends the bishop, moves towards the center in preparation for castling. And now we have little guy harassing big guy. Black is asking the white bishop, what do you want to do? Do you want to capture? Do you want to run? Let's see what he does, what the master does here. He backs off and maintains this attack on the knight, X-raying the bishop and the queen. All defended. Everything's defended well. So far, so good for the C player. He castles. And now the rook takes this file in preparation for this file being opened. And now black starts to chip away at the center pawn. This is a typical way of opening up the breaking up the center pawns of your opponent. You can start to capture them once your pieces have developed, as I mentioned in another video. And now the bishop develops, preparation for castling. And now black decides to capture, and white recaptures with the pawn. And we have an exchange. These are all options. There were other moves, as long as everything's defended well. Some of them lead to advantages and disadvantages, and it depends on the skill of your opponent whether or not these little differences will mean all the difference, and it can against a better opponent who knows the opening moves better, or has more experience at playing them. And the pawn recaptures, the bishop captures, and now white has the center isolated pawn, which is playable. And sometimes it's a strength and sometimes it's a weakness depending on the skills of the opponent. And now the knight swings over and attacks the undefended bishop. One of the possible moves. The bishop backs off. One way of handling it. And now the other bishop develops. And now white finally castles. The black rook takes the open file. Is doing nothing over here. And the white rook takes this other file, X-raying the bishop. And the rook slides over. So you see the C player is doing well enough here, developing all his pieces, bringing them towards the center, not taking any big chances yet. We'll see how he completely self-destructs very soon here. And now we have the first penetration into enemy territory. the knight enters here on d5, on e5 rather, hitting the bishop. If you notice, white's pieces are in attack posture, which they often are, having the benefit of the first move. And now black decides to try and relieve some of this, little bit of this pressure, and asks the bishop, shall we trade? We have all possible trades here now with the knight, with the bishop, and these bishops here. And white simply captures the knight, and the bishop captures the bishop, so we have one piece. Each side has one apiece now, and they're even. And now white captures this knight, so he has a piece. So that's two pieces. And now black self-destructs. I don't know what he was thinking. He may have, there may be a time pressure. I don't know how much time he spent on his clock. Or he simply miscalculated some idea that he had, some plan that he had. Or he just didn't count the number of pieces that were under attack, thinking that he could maybe recapture, not realizing he's giving up another piece. Which is what he does here. He takes the pawn with check, and the king simply recaptures. And now white has won 3 pieces to one to one white piece. And now black recaptures, but you see he's up a piece. There are 3 black pieces and 4 white pieces, 5 counting the queens. And now the basic strategy when you're up material is to simply try and exchange all the pieces, because you'll be left with one in the endgame that can go mop up pawns, capture other pawns, and then promote a pawn to a queen. And then it'll be very easy to checkmate the enemy king. So the master simply starts to try and trade pieces. And the bishop captures. The king slides back to get out of potential checking squares. Little defensive move. And now this pawn advanced to allow the queen out, increasing its mobility and cutting out some squares for white. The knight can't move here now, and neither can the bishop. But it will be very difficult now for black to do much, because he's down in material. He doesn't have a counterattack already in place, and with decent play, with no major mistakes by white, he'll eventually be able to win more material, having the extra piece. He'll be able to launch gang attacks, and black won't be able to defend. The king gets out of any potential checking squares, and also allowing black now to show what he wants to do. And now black has opened up a square for his bishop to possibly come here and attack this pawn. And now the queen could just come here, maybe create a mating threat. The queen slides up, attacking this undefended pawn. Power move number 3. And the pawn runs, one way to handle it. And now this move is also preparation for a major check here with the battery. A battery's been formed. Whenever your opponent forms a battery, you have to take it very seriously and see what they can do with it. And black blocks this checking diagonal by advancing the pawn. And now that this will no longer work too well, he moves the bishop and actually creates a threat here. There's a simple little tactic. Now that this bishop is here, this pawn is pinned against the king. He's x-raying the king. And if he doesn't see it, the queen will be able to capture this pawn, because this pawn can't move. And he does not see it. He probably should have moved the king. And the queen captures the pawn. So now white is up another little more material, getting the pawns back. The queen comes to challenge the queen, because things are getting serious over here. She wants to defend the king. And may not have been the best move, but there aren't many good moves when you're behind. The queen simply captures, knowing that he is up material and wants to eliminate all the pieces. The pawn recaptures, And now this pawn, the knight slides in to attack both pawns and simultaneously attack this pawn twice, once by the bishop and once by the rook. You see, it's becoming literally impossible for black to defend everything because there are too many attackers. And white simply starts to mop up pawns and capture pawns. And now we have 2 against 1. Before it was 3 against 2. And I believe in a short time he resigns. He has little guy harassing big guy here, moving the knight back, pushing him back into his own territory, trying to restrict his mobility. And the king wants to slide over and attack the bishop, but the knight swings in, preventing the king from moving to the dark squares. You see, and now the bishop is attacking the knight. It's a matter of technique now, as they say, for white to finish off his opponent. But you should play on, because your opponent could make a mistake. Not as likely when you're playing a master, but they do make mistakes as well. And the pawn advances. We do have a passed pawn too as well. Power move number 6, white does. And it can march down and become a queen. And that's one of the strategies in the endgame. Create this threat, and the bishop slides down here, at least trying to attack something. This pawn is under attack. It's undefended now. And he has a discovered defense of the pawn by pushing the pawn. The bishop is now defending this pawn. And the pawn is one step closer to becoming a queen. The king slides over, hoping to defend the queening square. But it's a little late. And we have a check against the king. The king moves here, and then if we can move the king and defend this square, we can become a queen. White can force a pawn to become a queen, and that's what he does. He prepares. He does a 1-2 combo to prepare the queening of the pawn, and it's here that black resigns, because now the knight could swing here and check the king, and then when the king moves, the pawn could advance and become a queen defended by the knight. It would look something like this. Whatever black does. Let's say he comes here to defend maybe this checking square. Now white could check the king here, and the king slides up, and now there's no way to stop the pawn from becoming a queen. Game over. Sometimes your opponent outplays you based on a very clever move or solid strategic play, but other times you make your own errors by miscalculation, as we saw in this game. As players improve, the game may boil down to the simple loss of one pawn, and with that little advantage, he's able to gain more mobility and launch more gang attacks and slowly win more material and slowly win the game that way.